1 Kings 17. Let's call this one I Believed, but Now I Know. Maybe subtitle it Another Wise Woman, because this is yet another week where the set of readings finishes up with the story of a woman who is key to the resolution of the story. This time it's a woman pretty much just identified as the widow of Zarephath. As in this chapter, as we promised, Elijah is introduced as a prophet of God who's going to begin the process of trying to turn Israel back to God by bringing a drought. And so after he brings the bad news that it's not going to rain again until I say so, God is going to say, go hide yourself. And he is going to provide for Elijah by a brook, allowing the water to supply him his need for drink and the ravens to feed him with bread and meat morning and night. But because the drought is real, over time, the brook is going to dry up. And so his provision, at least his provision of water, is no longer going to be there. But God is going to use the drying up of one of his provisions to drive him into a place where he is no longer just going to have his physical needs met, but he's going to get some companionship as well, as God is now going to send him to the widow of Zarephath. And now together, even though he's going to find her and her son in a desperate situation, basically her preparing their last meal, she is going to take a chance when Elijah says, if you can go get me some water, I'd really appreciate it. And she's going to go get him some water, even though she's in a desperate situation. And as she's leaving, he's also going to say, and also, could you spare some bread? And she's going to say, sir, the bread that I'm making is the bread that we were going to eat and prepare to die on. And so he's going to say, don't worry, because if you're kind enough to bring me a morsel of bread from what you're preparing, your bread's not going to wear out. And so nowadays that would sound like a hustle, but the widow is going to trust what Elijah has told her because it is consistent with what God has made clear to her already. And because she trusts God and Elijah, she is going to form a relationship through which they are all going to be provided for through the rest of the drought, understanding that there are times when God will use hard times to draw us together in relationships that he'll use to get us through. Understanding that the drought is not the end of their troubles. Hope hurts, y'all. We've talked about that before, because when God gets us through difficult times, sometimes that is just the beginning of our struggles. And so in this circumstance, after God brings them together to overcome the drought, the woman's son gets sick and he actually dies, which shocks not only her, but Elijah, who cries out to God, God, please don't tell me you brought me here to bring misery to this family. And as he cries out 3 times, he is going to cover the boy. And finally, God is going to respond. Hearing his cries, he is going to restore the boy to life, which prompts the lady at the end of the chapter to say this. At the end of verse 23, it's going to read, and Elijah said, see, your son lives. And the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth. See, even though she received the miracle of a single jar getting her whole family and Elijah through a drought, sometimes the miraculous can become passé. See, because this is a woman who came from the area of Sidon, and Sidon was an area that was God adjacent. It was not a part of the nation of Israel. And so in this situation, God drew Elijah into a relationship with a God adjacent family who had some idea of who God was. But in feeding the family miraculously, God got them to one level of confidence in what he could do in the prophet's presence. But in the tragedy that followed, even though it had to seem especially cruel at the time, he got them to another level of confidence, a level of confidence that quite possibly allowed this woman to understand how much she could do on her own, even after Elijah the prophet had moved on. And so even though I don't say it as much as I used to, it still holds true. My prayer for you is my prayer for me. To the degree that we get harsh news that comes on the heels of hard times, it can make hope hurt. But God willing, just as he used Elijah to point the widow in a direction that took her from believing she could survive difficult times to knowing she could stand on her own, that even though bad news can hit real hard, we don't lose track of the ways that God can use even bad news to take us from a place where we believe that we can survive to a place where we know we can.